BYU's depth chart is out. Now, Jeff Hansen is right. It's got a lot of oars on it. And I'm actually kind of surprised that BYU did what they did with the oars that they put on that depth chart. But I also understand, going back to our previous conversation about Kalani Sitake, why they are doing it. BYU wants to make SIU prepare for every inevitability, every probability, everything under the sun they possibly can muster from their vantage point. I completely understand it. Do I completely agree with it? Not really, because I look at it as saying, you know what, this is an FCS team. You don't really have to hide that much, but it's college football. And until there is essentially I don't know how you say it correctly, a uniform way of going about depth charts, injury reports, and the like, whether that comes down from the NCAA, more likely from the conferences, because I know the Big Ten and the MAC are requiring game day availability announcements. Now, Texas Tech has kind of bucked the trend nationally. They actually put out a release yesterday with essentially an injury report that had guys out for the season, out for the game this coming week for their opener against Abilene Christian, and also guys who are questionable for the game against Abilene Christian. That, man, that's revolutionary. The day that Kalani Sitake does that, I will be absolutely floored. And it's nothing against Kalani. It's nothing against BYU. It's a competitive advantage, the way that they've gone about things. But the depth chart for BYU has a few notable things, and I want to note them. So obviously, Jake Retzlaff and Gary Bohannon with the oar at quarterback. No QB3 listed. That was interesting. Whether it's McKay Hillstead or Trayson Bourget, it's anybody's guess. Now, we also have oars between the running backs. LJ Martin, Hinkley Rapati are your top two in terms of co-starters, with Miles Davis and Pokai Haunga as the backups. They have the oars there. I'm not surprised by that. I think that BYU is quite literally going to play all four of those running backs. There's no reason to run LJ Martin 30 times against Southern Illinois and risk an injury to him in that game. Let him get in there. Let him get some run maybe in the first and second quarter. By halftime, you have him cooling on the bench over there while guys like Rapati, Davis, and Haunga handle the rest of the load. The other one that I saw a couple of you point out on our Locked On Cougars insider group in terms of your reaction was the wide receiver position. There are 8 receivers listed with a bunch of oars there as well. Chase Robertson, JoJo Phillips, Darius Lasher, and Keelan Marion with an oar there, and Cody Epps and Parker Kingston. I'm urging you, do not be surprised with those 6 names in particular being listed there as the top 6 receivers for BYU. Fesi Sitake's history and BYU just overall under Aaron Roderick's tenure suggests they will play essentially a 6-man rotation at wide receiver. And those 6, they are truly the best 6 on BYU's roster. And they are the top returning production from that unit outside of Keanu Hill, who is BYU's starting tight end. So I look at it as you know what? This is actually, I think, shaping up where BYU is going to have a bunch of bodies that will throw at opposing teams. And fingers crossed, knock on wood, everything you need to do to muster good juju, BYU stays healthy. They have got a ton of depth, and that's depth that they did not have a season ago, and that obviously is a positive. On the offensive line, you have 4 established starters. Caleb Etienne at left tackle, Waylon Lapuaho at left guard, our good friend Connor Pay at center, and then Braden Keim at right tackle. There is an oar also at right guard. Sonny Makassini and Austin Leusa are competing there. Wouldn't surprise me to see them rotate in this game. I saw it on social media. I don't remember who put it out there. And if you see this podcast and you were the one that put it out there, I apologize for not giving you the direct credit. But somebody, I saw it, and I wish I would have bookmarked the tweet. They said that based on the oars they were seeing on the depth chart, they're saying, you know what, BYU's approaching this game against Southern Illinois as if it's a preseason NFL game, and they really are having open tryouts in this game. And that very well could be the case. BYU may be looking at all options, getting a feel for which guys are most deserving of playing time, and it's the perfect time to test that out. Now, you can't screw around too much because, as we mentioned, SIU is a very, very talented FCS program. But go out there, let these guys have some run and see what you're capable of. A couple of surprises on the defense. One surprise and one non-surprise. Surprise to me, to look at this and see Logan Lutui as a co-starter with Isaiah Banya. Now, Logan has been very good in training camp. Let me be very clear about that. But I thought Isaiah Banya, with his experience, the fact that he's a returning starter, I thought BYU would do him the honors of putting him as the clear-cut starter at opposite end. Apparently not. Logan Lutui has made his move there, and it feels like it's a neck-and-neck battle at that position. A position you should not be surprised by, because I have been talking about this guy all training camp long. There's been a lot of talk about safety and who's going to start at safety for BYU. And I had you guys ask me, well, what about Raider Demooney, Jake? What about Crew Wakely? What about Micah Harper? You know who the starter at free safety is, and he doesn't have an or next to his name? Tanner Wall. Yes, Tanner Wall is going to be a guy that you're going to want to get to know. I've mentioned it a couple of times. For those of you who are everydayers on this podcast, at least in the last week, the name to know in that defensive secondary is Tanner Wall. He's the free safety, and he's the free safety for a reason. He has been very, very good in camp. Every time I have watched him out there, he's been solid, if not spectacular. And it's cool to see a former walk-on who transitioned from wide receiver to the defensive backfield, getting a start ahead of guys like Raider Demooney, who are bonafide four-star prospects. And I'm not taking anything away from Raider or Micah Harper or Talon Alfrey. There's a lot of depth on that safety group, but that strong safety position has got 3 oars on it, whereas free safety has Tanner Wall and then an oar with Tommy Prasis and Falatau Satuwala behind him. So interesting developments across the board when it comes to BYU's depth chart, but I also want to add one other thing. Did you notice how many true freshmen are on this depth chart? Well, our good friend Casey Lundquist over at Cougs Daily, part of the Sports Illustrated channels, he pointed it out, and I did the math myself. I started looking at that. 10 true freshmen are on this depth chart for BYU football. That is a very, very cool thing to see. Now, I think it could freak some of you out thinking, well, Jake, they're going to be relying on these true freshmen to make up significant portions of their depth this season. Yeah, that could be a little bit scary under the circumstances, but also understand BYU had their best recruiting class to date under Kalani Sitake, particularly on the defensive side of the football. That talent is manifesting itself and showing itself early on in this season. And that is a positive for the future of the BYU football program. That means if you can retain that talent, continue to hone its craft, develop it, and let it grow at the pace you hope it grows at, those are guys that are projected to be the stalwart defenders and stalwart players overall for future BYU teams in 2025, 2026, 2027. And that sets you up to have some bedrock players you can build around, especially on defense. I look at Tommy Prasis. I look at Falatau Satuwala. That's cool to see them being the co-backups at free safety. You also look at guys like Viliami Pua. You look at guys like a Reiner Swanson at tight end, Pokai Haunga at running back, Cody Hagan, Tei Nakua. Who else was on that list? Ephraim Asiata, Tommy Prasis, Jonathan Cabea, and Trey Alexander at cornerback. All these guys are going to get an opportunity to make an impression for the BYU football program, and that bodes very, very well for what BYU's evaluation was of these players and bringing them in and giving them an opportunity to compete. I know that some veteran players may lose playing time to these young players, but that's the simple nature of this game. If you cannot be the best on the field at your position, BYU has to play the best players available. There's just, Kalani said it before, and he'll say it again 1,000 times. Best players play, and that absolutely has to be the case. Loyalty to a veteran, etc., it's all good and dandy, but in the circumstance BYU's in right now where they need to win games and win them right now, you got to play the best players, and that bodes well with those 10 true freshmen making up parts of that depth chart for BYU. There's a lot of talent in the wings for the BYU football program, and given the adequate time to develop, and obviously, hopefully they stick around. There's the transfer portal out there and the like, but so long as they stick around with the BYU football program, that is a very, very positive thing, and that as you project forward for the BYU Cougars of something you can say, okay, they know what they're doing when it comes to the recruiting game. Now, can they elevate that just a little bit more and bring in some even more talented players? Well, then you're cooking with grease, as they like to say, and that'd be a really, really fun thing to track in the coming seasons for BYU and Kalani Sitake.